I'm excited about the possibility of painting a little bit of spring today with these Pussywillows, and it's just going to be fun. And if we're not having fun painting, then what's the point, right? So we're going to start just throwing some color down. I want to channel the softness and the colors of these beautiful buds, these signs of spring, and get a feel for them with some wet and wet painting. So we're going to create our background first. And if you usually paint an object and then try to paint a background around it, you know how frustrating and hard that can be to choose some colors. I'm using some palette dirt right now just to get some neutrals down onto the paper and to paint around your object. So starting with a really nice soft base layer can be a really good way to do a little bit of pre-planning. Let's throw some browns down here. Just using what's in my palette. I very rarely wash my palette because there's so many beautiful neutrals in it. So it's just as fast as that. The top color here is mostly lavender. We're going to throw a little bit of that browny green up here as well. And look at how just adding that warm brown and then the cooler violet gives us the beginnings of a painting, the beginnings of a composition. And then we can build the rest of the painting from there. Right now my paper is flat. This is a Blick Premier watercolor block, and I'm just going to tilt it a little bit. All of the supplies I'm using are linked up in the description below the video, except for my palette dirt. I don't sell that. You got to make your own. I'm just going to tilt my paper a little bit. The reason we often tilt the paper as watercolor painters is that gets the excess water moving to the edge of the paper, and that will often help you to avoid big watermarks and blooms. If you have a puddle of water in the middle of your paper, it dries way more slowly than the outer edges, and you'll often see watermarks and blooms being created in that area. We are actually going to encourage some blooming in our painting, so I'm going to start adding a little more lavender here. And right now everything's juicy and moist, very wet and wet. So I get a lot of movement and a lot of softness, and I think you should be able to see some of that color just sliding away down the page. I'm going to mix a little indigo into my dirt over here. See if I can see if it'll look nice touched into the painting. Payne's Gray also works, Sodalite Genuine, and then back to a little bit of brown. Tweaking with my colors is always a little bit of a back and forth. I want to try to use a little splatter, some drips, to create the fuzzy Pussywillows in my painting, but in order to do that, those drips will create watermarks and push color away. But in order to do that, I need to have some darker color on my paper. So let's just go a little darker with our experimentation here. That's the straight indigo. I'm going to touch in a little bit of this brown. I'm not even sure what that brown is, to tell you the truth. I almost wonder if it isn't the iridescent russet, because that's sitting here near my palette. So I think, made by Daniel Smith. So I think we're going to call it that. Should be close enough. So now I've got some darks. I'm going to darken up my lavender as well. Just see what we can get here. I'm going to try using watermarks to create the texture of my Pussywillows, but if it doesn't work, I do have a backup plan. So you'll get to see me try one thing and then very possibly problem solve my way into another way of doing it. As I'm waiting for the paper to get to the right level of moisture for me to do the watermarks, I'm seeing a lot of excess moisture gathering in the corners here. So I'm just going to blot that up, because watermarks can happen on the edges too. It's just a lot easier to blot excess moisture from the edge of the paper and then from the middle. So this is the part where you pause and breathe and plan when you're waiting for that next step, for the paper to get to that level. I want this upper area to start to settle into the paper. And that's kind of what I'm waiting for right now. As this lighter blue, lavender, and this bit of indigo start to soak in and begin to dry, they kind of tend to establish their place in the painting. And so I need to wait for that moment, because if it's too wet, any watermarks I try to create are just not going to do anything. They're just going to bleed away or to the edge of the paper like my excess moisture is doing. So I pause and I hold and I think my thoughts and I plan my next steps. And then when I start to see the shine disappear from the areas I want to work in, then I know that if I introduce new water into that area, I'm going to probably get a watermark. So let's give it a try. Might be a little bit damp here still, but I think it's good. Actually, I think it's working. So I just put 3 little drips right in here. We'll make that actually one big pussy willow. And you can see the water in there, in that drip, pushes against the color that was sitting on the surface of the paper, but it doesn't want to move too much, because the drying pigment around it absorbs or just holds it in place just a little bit more than if it was really moist. I'm actually lifting out with a thirsty brush some fuzzy bits as well. And that's another way to do it. And let's try another drip right in here. I'm not flooding the paper with moisture. Waiting and breathing. And it's going to be pretty subtle in that spot. That's okay. Let's try it in a darker area right along here where we put the darker indigo. And then we'll move up here. Now, if I wanted to be a little more random, I could actually, tap with my brush and spatter, and that's going to give me watermarks as well, but in a lot less control. And introducing too much water means my shapes are going to get much larger. You can see that water pooling and flowing here. So I'm going to use that thirsty brush again to kind of work together with what's happening on the paper. So we have a little bit of organic, those drips of water pushing against the drying pigment, and then we have a little bit of mechanical, that intentional lifting with the thirsty brush to create those soft shapes. Let's put one there, one there. And different colors are going to react and watermark to different degrees, to different extents. So this is something you want to play with and experiment with your own palette of colors at home. Get to know which colors really cooperate well, which ones react strongly. Indigo is a color that really watermarks quite dynamically. And so I know that when I'm using indigo, I can throw in drops and drips and see movement and action start to happen. And it's really exciting and also unpredictable. So you get a little bit of both. Whenever you're doing stuff that's really exciting in watercolor, you tend to get some unpredictability with that too. Okay, so let's move around and try some different things to enhance the beginnings of the Pussy Willows that we've created. I'm going to make a puddle of 3 colors, all my colors, to make this interesting gray. My little smudge of iridescent russet, my lavender, my indigo. It gives me this really nice cool gray. And I'm going to see if I can use that just with a tiny bit of moisture in it to create another way of painting my Pussy Willows by painting some negative shapes. So up here the paint is drying, not dry yet. And so if I paint with a nearly dry brush, I don't want it to flood the paper and create watermarks. So I'm trying not to upset the balance of the neutrals too much, but I can paint around a curved shape here and a curved shape here and hint at Pussy Willows in that area. I can even use a dark really dark color, give a background. So I'm painting the background around some Pussywillows. And that gives me yet another effect, the outer edge of those little buds. And I'm just toying with some shapes here. Look at how that little shape right there looks like a stem. Let's see if we can do some other hints of stems. Twigs, so that we get that twiggy feel in the background. Maybe something up here, here in this warm area. Thinking about what will make my painting look better, more like end of winter shrubbery. The Pussywillows here have the little dark casing that they're popping out of, so we can put some hints of warm russet there, right in there. And because the painting is starting to dry, but it's still quite moist, I can place color and see a lot of softness. Everything looks like its first layer, flowing, gently, intuitive. And yet I have some control because there's not a ton of water on the paper anymore. In fact, up here you almost see a crisp line. Kind of takes over the entire painting as soon as you start putting anything that's crisp on. But it's really starting to bring the painting to life. I'm not loving this big splash of dark indigo right there. It's too dominant in the rest of the painting. So we're going to just try to sneak it out of there. And I have a number of strategies I use for problem solving when a color is too dark. This one I just tried is just flooding it with a little bit of lavender and then pulling that excess moisture out to the side, and that actually worked really well. Adding, you know, if you have an area that's starting to dry, has some stuff you don't love, it's not hard to flood in fresh color and push that excess dark color away. Color-wise, this painting is really quite simple. We're working with browns and we're working with blues. And our browns are kind of a rusty russet color, which gives us warmth, and our blues give us our cool value, our cool temperature. And that gives us this beautiful interplay between warm and cool. Really nice for contrasts. I've been using a round brush this entire time, and I've linked to that in the description below the video. For now I'm going to switch, and I want to start working with more of a rigger brush. This is a Loose Goose dagger striper. I'm just going to pick up some of that russet and see if I can do a little, actually I'm going to throw down some burnt sienna with it, just because I'm starting to run low. And we'll see if we can add some line at this stage that will stay a little more dominant in the painting. This brush does really nice thin lines, and it's long and whippy enough that it looks really organic, because I have a tendency, if I'm painting lines with a shorter brush, they often tend to start to look really mechanical and all like soldiers in a line. And there's a time and a place for soldiers, but it's not in the organic, loose and soft feeling of spring. We want it to feel like the breezes are blowing. It's warm, you have energy because you've got your heavy winter boots off. Your dog is stomping in the puddles and rolling in stinky things. I'm just relaying my experience from this morning, which was a rather muddy run out in the spring. So as you can see, everything's still very soft at this stage. Look how dominant, however, my branches are up here, and that's partly because the lines are a bit crisper up in this area. much softer down here, and also because of the color temperature contrasts. And seeing that I'm having temperature contrasts up here makes me wonder what would happen if I had some temperature contrasts down here. Let's spatter a little lavender, take a risk, and see if we can't give a little bit of energy to the painting just by doing that. And let's, oh, that's too much lavender, swooping all over. I'm just gonna blot slightly. And that's another way to create Pussywillows, with a little bit of blotting with the paper towel. And then I'm gonna just lift with my brush right there and curve out that shape. Okay, so at this stage I really do feel like I'm not going to see a lot of contrast here until I come back and add my finishing details. And I'm going to come back and do very little to this painting to give it a feeling, a springy, soft feeling. My Pussywillows are very, very soft, and I am totally okay with that. It's keeping those soft, lighter values, and I'm just worrying in a little bit more water here. But in keeping those soft, lighter values, I've created those shapes that I can then add darks around to make them pop out and enhance them. And I'm going to save that. Actually, I'm not going to save it. I'm going to just do a little bit more. Just adding some little hints of dark in curved shapes around those lighter value shapes. It's going to help bring out the contours of the Pussywillow, and also keep the softness that I really need if I want them to feel soft and fuzzy. Trying to paint Pussywillow shapes on dry paper is going to make it hard to get that fuzzy soft look. I'm going to try one more time to spatter with a little bit of water down below here. And now, since I've been fussing for a while, I'm going to leave it alone. I really like what's happening on the paper. There's a few things that are working well. The colors I'm really happy with. There's a lot of really pretty textures. There's some of those twigs already appearing. Lots of potential here to bring out in layer 2. Well, we're going to call this bare minimum painting because I really don't want to overdo this. I like the softness that's happening in the painting. That is definitely not the color I was using before. Burnt Bronzite, I bet that's the one. Yep, okay, Burnt Bronzite Genuine. The Iridescent Russet, pretty color, not the one I was wanting. Okay, so here I am. I've got a Pussywillow here and a Pussywillow here. I've got some softness over here that could become Pussywillows. Over here it could become Pussywillows. I've got some softness down here that could be distant Pussywillows. I've got lots going on, and I don't want to overdo it or belabor my painting. I really want to just focus on, let's place the twigs, and then from there we can decide if we need to enhance our Pussywillows further. So we're just going to pull a line down. And I'm making it an artistic line. I'm not being really strict with what I see from my Pussywillows. I want this to feel really graceful. So I'm going to use some of the lines that I've developed over the years of painting to create some really nice curves if I can. I'm also using this Dagger Striper, which is a brush that has this wonderful movement. So it really does a lot of the work for me in creating those shapes and the nice curves that I want to have. I'm mixing up a gray right now. I'm not going straight with the Burnt Bronzite. Adding in a little bit of cool color to it will actually help it look more interesting and complex. So adding in some of the indigo can be really helpful. I could also make this feel more distant if I create a kind of gray shape over here. Actually, that's a really weird line. So I'm going to soften parts of it so that it's a little less less obtrusive in the painting. It just has just a hint of presence there. And then let's pull up, let's enhance this line here and pull down to create a line. And maybe a twig coming here. And then that could be a pussy willow there. And I'm paying attention to what's underneath. I'm not just putting twigs wherever I think they should be. I want to put them where the painting tells me they should go. Using the lights and darks in the painting to help guide me. Using the shapes of the potential buds as well. And using a mixture of diluted color for background shapes. And some stronger, bolder color. And this line I like, it's a broken line. Feels like it should continue this way. So let's pull it across here, something like that. And I used water for that. And then I can go in and darken it. I think that works. A lot of busyness going on in this one. If I were to paint this again, and I always do, I like to paint things more than once because I get better at painting them every time. So I'm making my mistakes and experimenting on this version. And then I do further explorations that help me paint it with more confidence. Usually simplified because I tend to overwork paintings at this early stage when you're just getting to know them. It's not just beginner painters that overwork paintings. Spatter will give me some texture. Soften where I don't want the spatter to dominate. And a hint of an edge over here. Might just give me one more pussy willow in that portion of the painting. I don't want to do much here. I'm really trying to have restraint. Trying to create a network of twigs that is interesting and pretty. I love networks. I love little webs of line hiding in the painting. Sometimes I get too fussy with them and then you just soften it away. Okay, so you can't see any of the pussy willows here, and I'm trying to decide how much that bothers me. For now, I'm going to leave it, and maybe I'll come back to this. If I don't, I have another good pussy willow demo that I can show you. And a nice first layer before I kind of kept adding stuff before I was really ready to add it.